Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with y'all. I get to say y'all, so I get to be that guy in the room. And I don't know what the blue hell this stuff is outside, but I do not approve. This is a fun group, and this is going to be much more flowy. So we want y'all to really engage with them in terms of a dialogue and discussion, because the group in front of us here are dealing with when this stuff gets real. How do you empty a trash can? Mayors make payroll, believe it or not. This is where this stuff happens. So we want it to be a back and forth with y'all. And I'll key up. Each one's going to get about 3 or 4 minutes to summarize what they're up to. And then we're going to turn it over to y'all and try to do some provocative questions. And my goal is to build on the legacy of John Freemuth and say something provocative and out of tone at some point that gets a good reaction. So I shall do my best with that legacy. So with that, we'll begin with Mayor Nate. Mayor's from Farmington, New Mexico. And Mayor, why don't you just give us a couple of the real hot spots that are driving your work right now?
Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm very humbled to have been invited to Boise, Idaho. It's my first visit to the area. I'm glad to see winter has not left here yet either. It's still snowing and raining down in Farmington, New Mexico. But I do want to take the moment as the mayor. I'm also the #1 salesperson for the city of Farmington, and would like to invite all of you down to the beautiful Four Corners area where you can experience world-class fly fishing. I hear there's a lot of fly fishermen in this room, and fisherwomen also. We also have some amazing cultural areas, 3 World Heritage Sites, some beautiful landscapes, Bisti Badlands, look that one up if you're looking for some alien-type landscapes, great history down in that area. So we would invite you down there, farmingtonnm.org, that's where you need to go. The city of Farmington undertook an initiative to grow outdoor recreation really out of necessity. We are an oil and gas community. We have produced coal-fired power plants. We're big in our area, and we've seen a lot of those jobs disappear. Policy has led those folks to go to other places. And looking at the landscape back in 2014, when I was elected to as a city councilor, recognized that we had to find some low-hanging fruit, things that didn't require a lot of immediate investment that we could take advantage of, and outdoor recreation became one of those key target areas. So listening to the last presenters talk about the amenity issues and the things that are happening now in places like Moab, where the infrastructure wasn't built for a community to house that many people. We, on the other hand, have really good infrastructure, and we have opportunity in a lot of hotel rooms that can be filled. We do have a housing issue, which I think is happening nationwide, but we can grow into that. And so we had that pre-planning process because it was built by the oil and gas companies. So it's an interesting history in our area when you consider our accessibility to the canyons and the outdoor areas were built by oil and gas companies who built the roads that got people out there on the trails. And so we have this really interesting confluence of industries and tourism and outdoor recreation that I think is kind of unique to our area. So we are pushing forward in that. We've created a fund called the Community Transformation and Economic Diversification Fund. As an elected official, people say all the time, what are you going to do to change the landscape? What are you going to do to bring in more jobs? We don't create jobs as a city. We don't want to create more government jobs. We want to encourage private investment. Well, this fund then goes into building new amenities or enhancing the current amenities that we have. We have rebranded our community as Farmington is a place where outdoor lovers and active families thrive. Our initiatives, and Ashley Kornblatt, who's here with us with Public Land Solution, has been a part of some of those initiatives. It includes actually the slide that was up there that Megan put, showing how the outdoor recreation economy works. We're looking for folks who are looking to retire. We're looking for folks who want location-neutral jobs where they work from home, but they have one of the most beautiful backyards in America. Those are kind of where we're going and what we're pushing for. But I certainly appreciated, kind of the roadblocks that we can kind of foresee down the road in communities who have been overly successful in many places, and how we can kind of plan ahead of that. So lots going on in Farmington, and I appreciate, again, the opportunity to be here with you all.
Next up, very fortunate to have Sara Arkle here with us. Now, Sara has a very unique job because I think she has one of the greatest jobs in America, selfishly. Here is the manager of resources for Boise's Parks and Rec Department, which includes the Boise Foothills, one of the most complex public land interface locations, I would argue, in the States right now, and really the frontier of a lot of our discussions today. So, Sara.
I'm not going to be able to keep up with Mayor Nate here. I really want to go to Farmington now. So can we do this there next time? Happy to be here. This is exciting. I've been coming to these conferences since I was in my 20s, so it's nice to be on this side of the table, hopefully. As I look out, there's a lot of Boiseans here. I'm going to say some stuff you already know, but those of you who aren't from Boise, I get to make the enviable statement that I think Boise's doing it right. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong. We've got challenges associated with the, what was it, the amenity, what was it? Trap. For sure, homelessness issues, overuse issues, so to speak, rise in use. But the things that I want to say about Boise is that since the 60s, this town has worked community-wide with many partners, including state and federal agencies, to create access to open space. Whether you live on the bench in Boise and you want to walk to a park, or you live in the North End and you want to walk on a trail, our goal here in this town is to make a 10-minute walk accessible for open space. And we've been working on it for 60 years. I am just one tiny little piece of a long history of people who have tried to make that goal a reality. If you haven't had a chance, it's not a great day today, but hopefully you can maybe get out at some point. But we are sitting in Barber Park. This is not a City of Boise property, it's an Ada County property. But the river runs through it, right? We've got the river, the greenbelt, all of these amenities that are seamless to users create interjurisdictional requirements to collaborate, to work together across different regulations, across different policies, across different politics. And so I think even though there's a lot of challenges ahead of us, even though we have to keep striving to continue to keep our staff resilient, keep our staff able to handle the various challenges that come their way. And that's not just, you know, how are we going to hire custodial staff, because that's been a challenge. Keep the bathrooms clean, keep the trash cans emptied, but also how are we gonna handle our users who have gotten a little sparky lately? And so we find ourselves being in a situation where we're having to help people kind of understand their own emotional responses in an environment that elicits such. So we have a lot to talk about. I am looking forward to a lot of questions, so please get your cards out. They can be provocative, they can be personal, anything. We're here to discuss.
That's good. That's good.
All right, so our next speaker, Luis, and I have been going back and forth video chatting, so I get to be obnoxious to you up front, which really excites me. One thing about today that shouldn't be forgotten is how special it is that we're all together, y'all, because it didn't have to end this way. People could have been disconnected from nature. We could have totally industrialized these lands. This moment is special, and the guy there had a lot to do with it as the first leader of Colorado's outdoor rec office.
Wait, which part?
The old part, long time ago, being old. But he's on this journey of asking what is the next step. And so I'll start with a provocation to him. Outdoor rec is a massive industry by any measure, massive. Yet there's not a unifying approach to it that we take as a nation. And Luis is beginning to fight his way and slog his way through it and has some really innovative thoughts, I think, for our group collectively about what is the appropriate response and organizational and governance structure at the federal level. So with that, Luis, I'll set you up.
Well, happy tax day, everybody. No? Really? Whoever's writing the slides back there, could you step back to the profile pictures really quick? I just want to point out something. This is what government work does to you. Does anybody? We were all commenting on how good we all look up there, but thank you for the invite. Thank you for the introduction. One of the things that we're really trying to focus on collectively is what does that voice look and sound like collectively for our industry and for our economy? So I'm going to throw a couple of figures at you, but I'm also going to ask you a couple of questions. How many people in the room right now, consider what you're wearing, what you carried into the room, what you have in your hands, feel like conservatively they have on them or with them at least 2 products that could be categorized within the outdoor recreation sphere? I see fleece vests, I see OtterBox cases for phones, I see mountain khaki jeans, I see UGG boots, see a couple of Patagonia raincoats. Oh, what is that? That's a nice backpack. Is that an old JanSport? Well done, back there. That adds up to a $682 billion economy for the United States. responsible for over 4 million American jobs. That's bigger than the auto and pharmaceutical industry combined in the US. Yet when you step back from that and you ask yourself that question, what does our collective political voice look like? How do we impact change at the state and federal level with respect to policy, with respect to NGO construction, with respect to the amenity trap, all the things we've heard about thus far. In 2015, Governor Hickenlooper had an experiment in Colorado in partnership with then Governor Herbert in Utah, a Republican state and a Democratic state, saying if we had a state office for outdoor recreation industry, could we actually drive change in these spaces? The experiment worked. From 2015 to now, it went from 8 states to now almost 20 that have an official office of outdoor recreation industry focused on 4 distinct pillars: economic development, conservation and stewardship, education and workforce development, and public health. So the experiment has been codified into actual action and momentum. And now the real question, to our esteemed moderator's point, is, do we approach the federal government with this question? Do we actually ask the question for this multi-billion-dollar economy responsible for millions of American jobs? Do we codify that into a federal office? I'll stop there. Thank you.
He either teased the lead or he buried it. I don't know what he did there. So thank you. And then finally, we have Director Buxton here. Now here's what's fun. I can nerd out in this room. State parks are fascinating because you serve what public land managers serve, but you can only eat what you make in terms of your revenue to offer those services and amenities. In many ways, how we are all dealing with revenue, state parks has been there for a long, long time. And Director Buxton will share some exciting news here, and then frankly, probably some of the stressors. So, Director.
Thank you. Again, Susan Buxton. This is my second anniversary as the state park director. I am many of you, I have a lot of friends in the audience, so it's good to see everybody. And I do talk fast. I'm a recovering attorney, so that happens. And if I talk too fast, somebody yell at me. One of the things that's, that was mentioned is, first of all, who's running the slides? Can you just put up my first slide? So I want you to look at the map of Idaho. Kind of in the middle of it, you'll see Chalice, and above that is the Frank Church Wilderness Area. So we've got 30 state parks across the state of Idaho, approximately 60,000 acres that we manage. And it doesn't sound like a lot of acreage, but they're pretty much trailheads for all the state lands and federal lands that are next to them. We manage with 171 full-time employees. We manage these parks. That's approximately 1 full-time employee per 41,000 visitors a year. I'll contrast that a little bit to the National Park Service that has 1 full-time employee to 15,000 visitors. So with that, I want to do a huge shout out to Governor Little and the legislature for providing the state of Idaho and the Parks Department $100 million that was just appropriated a couple weeks ago. That is the largest investment in outdoor recreation in state history. So in order... $95 million of that was from the surplus funds. $5 million was from ARPA. Most of that was, $70 million of that will be going, actually $75 million of that will be going to deferred maintenance. We've had parks in our system for over 100 years. And of course, because we are a pay-to-play system, 95% of our annual budget is deferred, is dedicated funds, which means it's pay-to-play, which is camping fees, registration for boats or OHVs or snowmobiles, those types of things, and then some grants. And then we do have a passport system, so if you're a resident of the state of Idaho, you get to have access to your state parks annually for $10 a carload. I have people telling me, it says, we load as many people in our cars as we can. So that's it's a bargain. It's the best bargain that we have. We do, we're talking about the amenities that we are lacking in our small towns. These are all small towns. I'll have you go back to that first slide because that's kind of the thing I want to talk about. All over the state, a lot of these little towns are not necessarily resort towns, but every single one of them is impossible to buy a house in. You'll even see in Kellogg area, which is in the Silver Valley. We do have the trail, the Coeur d'Alenes. It's a 72-mile trail. It's a capped railroad because of the, it was a Superfund site. And so we run that, but it's huge. And we don't charge people like some of our states around us that charge for access to walk in or bike in. So those amenities are very difficult and expensive to manage. We are having a very difficult time with housing across the state, even in Challis, Idaho. Challis, Idaho is almost impossible to buy a house because there's not much there. We just bought the Challis Hot Springs, which has been held in one family for over off and on for about 100 years, and it's an amazing amenity too. It clicks every single box as to why you would have a state park, the natural resource there, the indigenous peoples that frequented it, and the history there, the history of the mining history that, as we were talking, the mayor of Farmington is talking about, that a lot of those trails and roads came from the mining history from over the last 100 years plus in that area. It is an amazing place. We manage with the Forest Service and BLM around 400 miles of trail there from our existing land of the Yankee Fork State Park. So this is an addition to that. And it is the first piece of property that the state parks will own or manage on any stretch of the Salmon River in the state. So it's really exciting. Anybody who wants to come to that dedication, it's May 3rd. Love to have you. But when you're talking about working together, like the outdoor recreation piece, the governor and the outdoor recreation cabinet have been working together to try and figure out how do we better work together with all of our stakeholders, not just state agencies, but also we work with the City of Boise managing a veterans state park. We do have Lucky Peak State Park, which is up at the top of one of the trails here. If it wasn't snowing, you could ride your bike up there in about 15 minutes. We've got lots of stakeholders helping us, lots of private property owners, outfitters and guides, the food producers, including the Cattlemen's Association, the forest products industry. They all provide public access to private lands, including Idaho Power. Idaho Power is also a big partner with us too. So if I missed anybody in the room, Senator Just is in here and he carried our budget. Everyone please give him a huge round of applause. So with that, we will look forward to working with you from that $100 million. About $5 million of it is earmarked for us to work with stakeholders to increase some capacity and access across these types of different uses. Everybody wants to recreate. Part of my career at the state isn't very long. I was, like I said, I'm a recovering lawyer, but I was the HR director for the state of Idaho during the pandemic. And watching the pandemic and watching what was happening in the state and across the United States through the pandemic, and then seeing people just clamoring to get outdoors, that was the only thing that that kept people sane. It really was. And working with the state parks then, and then eventually becoming the director was exciting. I do have a background in natural resource law, but that doesn't do anything to prepare me for this. So I look forward to working with everybody in the room about what do we do, how do we continue the fiscal issues, because we can't keep managing all these systems without coming up with a better funding formula.
All right, so it's question time from the audience. We have a group that'll go around and collect them, and while they're collecting, I'll start with a question that I prepared. So by 2050, 7 out of 10 people in the United States are going to live in cities. They're going to be older, they're going to be grayer, and they're using more and more of the green spaces. In fact, in the urban framework, our most visited park in the United States of America without an entry fee, anyone know what that is, the most visited park? Central Park in New York, 48 million visits a year. Now entirely run by a conservancy. The word partnership is dropped over and over and over again. I want to pivot to the group here because you're all in that space. What is going to be the role of private-public partnerships in your space in terms of visitor service, and how does that relate to an increased urbanization of our guests who are very pulsy in their visits because they live in urban centers and then visit our outdoors in more pulsy sort of experiences than longer terms?
I feel like I need to. You're correct that I buried the lead for your question, so I think this is a good segue. I threw a lot of big numbers out to you as the audience about this multi-billion-dollar economy. Yet what you just mentioned about the NGO infrastructure, and the Department of the Interior now has the Office of Special Partnerships with relation to the relationship with the private sector. The BLM is now creating their foundation, which was chartered in 2017. They're now starting to work on turning the lights on for that. How many multi-billion-dollar economies do you know of that rely on an NGO infrastructure to take care of the ecosystem and that infrastructure? I don't know if any of you caught the article in the Scientific American about nature truly being infrastructure. It's in this month's edition. It's an incredible piece talking about if we would just think about some of these spaces the same way we think about highways, stoplights, all of those social service amenities, which to your point, the pandemic proved to us that not only is time outside good for you, but we now have data, economic-driven data to show that it not only changes a community's public health and mental health state, but it also creates this sense of connectivity. You cited the numbers out of Central Park, and so one of the things that we're talking about is how do you look at this through the lens of infrastructure, but also understand that without the appropriate connectivity between funding mechanisms and also governance mechanisms, that we keep coming back to the same questions of how to take care of these pieces. If the largest green space, the most heavily used green space in the United States is wholly run by a conservancy, ultimately that in and of itself answers that question.
If I can make a plug real quick for ballot initiatives, I think Boise's the last 20 years has raised $20 million. I mean, we're at, what, $220,000, or excuse me, person, 220 person, 1,000 person. You guys get me, right? Come on. Thank you. I haven't talked to people in 5 years. So I'm like shaking, so just bear with me here. What I'm trying to say is the ballot initiatives that the city of Boise has passed, the community has begged for. They have asked us repeatedly in 2001, which was a shock to the country, by the way, that a city in Idaho would raise money, tax itself, for conservation. We raised twice. The city citizens have asked twice. Can we raise more money to protect open spaces, to protect clean water, to protect wildlife habitat and recreational opportunities? $20 million. We're about 15 million into that right now. And I think there's appetite for more. This town is driven by a need to be outside. I am also personally driven by a need to be outside. I'm assuming all of you are as well. And being in a room for a full day is probably going to be challenging around 3 p.m. So that is a challenge to the panel then. But ballot initiatives are a great opportunity for municipalities to raise money, to be opportunistic and flexible, to partner with nonprofits, to partner with conservancies in interesting ways. So to your point about how we fund this, I think ballot initiatives are going to have to be a part of the future for every city moving forward. The other thing I want to say really quickly is we have to start managing for expected use and user expectations. So there are many millions of people who are never going to get out into the hinterlands, right? They're going to go to open spaces in their city. And so their expectations for their experience is different. Their expectations for infrastructure is different. And as a management community, we need to think about maybe prioritizing those investments perhaps closer to home and providing opportunities to get farther away, to get a different type of a different type of user experience outside of the city, and think more deliberately about how we fund, plan, and execute user experiences in that way.
Really quickly, the Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation was created by a foundation. The Harriman family would not provide this Harriman State Park, 11,000 acres, which is in the Yellowstone ecosystem, to the state of Idaho if it did not have a professionally run parks department. Previously to that, there were parks obviously in the state system before that. That was in 1965 with Governor Smiley brought that to bear. But we do work very closely with foundations, with conservancies, because it is very expensive and difficult to find places where we can expand, where we can provide more capacity and more growth. So we have to work together. We have to figure out how we work better with other entities, not just government.
Okay, so we got a lot of questions in. I can take issue one myself. Leash your damn dog is generally the question, and clean up after its poop, if you would. Thank you. But more to the point, Mayor, you shared this, picks this up in terms of the public land management agencies as a good partner of you. Maybe you can share the story you shared last night with us about what it takes to get a group of kids out mountain biking on BLM lands right now.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, you know, it's funny to hear these stories in this conversation regarding public-private, you know, relationships and how we fund these things, because we are really at the ground level in New Mexico. New Mexico is the poorest state in the union. Not sure if you guys know that. We're in the bottom of a lot of lists. One of the lists we're at the top of is the amount of public lands that surround us. So San Juan County, where Farmington exists, 95% of the land is tribal and federal lands. So we have a very small area that we can actually manage ourselves. So much of it is BLM for the most part. The office down there, the BLM office in Farmington, is mostly an oil and gas office. I think we have 1.5 employees who help us facilitate recreation programming. Fortunately, you know, we started this back in 2015, bringing those folks to the table, and one of the guys who were running the recreation program is a former Farmington police officer, so he has been an advocate for us to some degree, but there's certainly not funding involved there to help facilitate what I would consider growth from the federal side. So the example Scott gave, you know, we have worked diligently with the BLM and San Juan County in funneling about $1.5 million that the BLM has utilized to grow mountain bike trails. They've built a mountain bike skills park. They've built a campground and OHV trails as well. But for a local nonprofit, where really a lot of these initiatives that we've put in play is to try and encourage user groups to coordinate and come together and raise their own money so that they can contribute and put their ownership into trail management, trail development, those kind of things. When it comes to getting one example, one of these small nonprofits, all they want to do is take a group of kids out every Wednesday night and take them out onto BLM designated trails. These are trails that are known, and we're not trying to build new trails. God forbid we do that. And the process of permitting is absurd. I mean, it's a months-long process to get a group of kids on a regular program where you're promoting healthy communities, you're instilling ownership of those public lands to those children so that we can grow what I believe is clearly here in Idaho. It's like we're at two different ends of the spectrum right now in discussions about outdoor recreation, because we're saying, hey, we're open. Bring your people that it's overflowing up here, bring them to New Mexico. We're primed and ready to handle that. I say that now, watch. I'll be here 10 years from now and be like, listen, stop coming to Farmington. I hope that's not the case. I hope what we learn here, what we can facilitate and put in play. But it's the same thing with the film industry. Our governor is taking broad steps to attract Netflix and all these companies to New Mexico with huge tax rebates if you're filming in New Mexico, but to get them to get a film permit to go out onto BLM lands. I mean, these are huge headaches that are stopping our local community from growing its economy by utilizing those public spaces. And we need help.
All right, a bunch of your questions center around something. I'm going to try to pull them together, and I hope I honor your questions in the process. How the blue hell do we pay for this stuff? The question of user fees is here. The question of Pittman-Robertson, where we're asking the hook and bullet to carry conservation. The question of, heaven forbid, you have an excise tax on a mountain bike or a kayak to support that. We're all adults in this room. What is the funding model that y'all would think is the right way? I'm not going to ask you for the dollars, but what's the structure by which we as a nation should begin having a discussion about how do we provide, you know, sustainable, predictable revenue to support these amenities that we all enjoy?
Did I say happy tax day already? I think I did. All kidding aside, when you talk about the backpack tax and you talk about the hook and bullet community really covering the bill for conservation and stewardship right now, and what that looks like moving forward. There is a disparity between that multi-billion-dollar economy and what they're willing to pay in. And there's a lot of people in the room who are going to chuckle under their breath when I say this out loud. There are trade associations for the industry that have been built. Their original charter was to fight the excise tax, was to fight any version of an excise tax, to make sure that backpack, fleece jacket, Ugg boots, khaki, work pants that you're wearing, all stay affordable. So the understanding of how to bring that mechanism forward, I think, is one of the pieces that's in front of us right now, to really understand if we want to have a political voice, we also need to show up with a little bit more willingness to pay into that system. Your mountain bike's going to cost a little bit more, but the value add to actually leverage those dollars, I think, is where and how that voice will emerge. Secondarily, a lot of the recovery funds that you're seeing coming out for infrastructure, I'm going to keep hammering on this concept of understanding if we look at these spaces within our ecosystem as infrastructure, if we codify some of these things in a different way. There are federal funds at the table, but when the left hand is struggling to understand what the right hand does, and there's no air traffic control at the federal level to really try to connect the dots between the agencies, try to connect the dots between public-private partnerships, a lot of those opportunities just kind of fall by the wayside because they're coming too hard, too fast, to your point, with too much red tape. So I do think there's an opportunity to have a larger conversation, but we as a community and an industry need to push ourselves harder to say, you know what? And I'll ask the same people that raised their hands that proudly said, absolutely, this fuzzy jacket's keeping me warm right now as the snow falls outside. Are you willing to spend $15 more for that jacket if you know 7 of those 15 extra dollars are going towards some of the things we're talking about? If you are, it's the same concept as a ballot initiative. We know these companies. We know the CEOs of these companies. We know the trade associations that are representing all of these companies. You can stand forward with one collective voice and ask for a different way to do business. The question is, are we willing to actually lean in to that different kind of conversation?
Let me give you a specific example. We have no dedicated funding for non-motorized trail maintenance, development, rerouting, or anything like that. We struggle to find ways to pay for that. One of the ways we pay for it is we have 6 yurts up here up above Idaho City. That's one of the ways we pay for that, and it doesn't go very far. Fortunately, we've been able to get a little bit of money in the last 2 years from the legislature. We have the Centennial Trail. That's a huge amenity for the state. It's codified in statute, but there has never been any funding for that trail. It's 900 miles from Nevada to Canada. So we got about $250,000 to work with that from the general fund from the state a couple of years ago. And but that doesn't go very far. So I agree. We have to have the conversation. How does everybody decide how we're going to fund outdoor recreation? Our $10 passport. That is voluntary. We have about 2 million people in the state of Idaho and about 1.8 million vehicle registrations. About 200,000 of those people buy a passport. So until we try and figure out how everybody who is coming on to not just state lands or federal lands or tribal lands or city lands or county lands, whether they're paying for it or not, we have to figure out a better funding source, and everybody has to start being part of it, because more and more people are expecting that, and they're expecting to be able to recreate out their front door. People move to Idaho for outdoor recreation.
I'll give you one heartfelt story, and then I'm going to hand it over because I think this might echo. People, to your point, they want to give. They want to be a part of this. But the challenge is the mechanisms right now and the structure to actually provide that funding don't exist. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a project in Steamboat, Colorado. Steamboat had the exact same problem that you're talking about. Non-motorized trails, how do we pay for them? How do we take care of them? Well, as you know, Google has a big footprint in Boulder, and there were a bunch of people that had second homes in Steamboat that worked for Google in Boulder. So a couple of nerdy engineers came up with the idea for a Google Ranger. Moderator. So let me explain to you what this is. It's a kiosk. Think of like a kiosk for paying for your parking, with a solar panel on top and a credit card swipey thing that they were going to put at every trailhead, and you could voluntarily swipe your card and contribute whatever you wanted, and those dollars would go directly to the association or the organization that took care of that trail. So your comment about permitting, Mr. Mayor, on trails, the red tape completely stopped that. So the mayor of Steamboat got so upset with this, he literally sent people to the town dump. You all know the old parking meters where you put a coin in and you crank it and you get your 15 minutes. He found a half a dozen of those. They found a half a dozen of those. City Council found a half a dozen of those in the dump. They put them in the ground in the parking lots, which town managed, and literally had to send somebody every single night to empty them because you had little kids dropping in the spare change that people found under their car seats, and the coin bins were full. People want to contribute. The challenge is creating the mechanism to allow them to do so.
I've got a couple of coins in my purse. So we work with Forest Service on managing use in the foothills. I would say 85% of the Boise foothills are open space, half of which is public land. Our Boise Forest Service, the district that manages the mountains within close to Boise, gets 4% of its budget to manage for recreation. The majority of their budget goes to fire management. Did you know that 80% of fires that were started in Idaho were started from people? I think we need to start thinking about the wildland-urban interface a little bit more holistically. Not just fire prevention and mitigation, but also recreational use and visitation. I think I'll just stop. Did you want to say anything?
Because broad perspective, I'm learning.
And just for a quick second, I don't particularly like user fees, and no offense, Susan, but okay. You know, as we urbanize, especially as we urbanize, there's going to be a lot of kids who don't have the money, the access, the ability, the support to get out into open spaces and learn about why they're important. I think user fees can be prohibitive in terms of encouraging access and a conservation spirit.
That's a great segue. So everyone go back and read Frederick Law Olmsted, either read Genius of Place or Clearing in the Distance. The same guy designed Yosemite, designed Central Park. He made that exact same point. Parks are the small d democratic space of our nation. It's a unique American proposition that we make in the preservation of these spaces. I'm going to insert a question, and I don't know how to frame this, so allow it to drone and then respond however you want to. And I'm coming from the South, and I got to tell y'all, I haven't been in a room this white in a long, long time. It's shocking to me. I'm recoiling a little bit. As we talk about the outdoors, as we talk about these spaces, and we're asking voters for their support, I'm going to tell y'all, America doesn't look like this room. How do we get America writ large to understand and appreciate the value of these spaces? Because I think our proposition has always been people only care about what they experience and enjoy, and we all take people out rafting. I see Steve Stubner here. He probably doesn't remember. He took me down the Payette when I was 19 years old. That transformed my life and made me care about the outdoors. How do we get to those people who we're not going to get to want to invest in something we all know, and our First Nations certainly know, are some of our most important resources that go far beyond our consumptive patterns?
Yeah, this is a good question. Down in Farmington, we sit just on the edge of the Navajo Nation. It's the nation's largest reservation, and one of the issues, historical issues that we faced, of course, is just that relationship between industry and development and those things, and how it relates to the people of the Navajo Nation. What we have seen happen over the last 30 years, specifically, is a big influx of Navajo Nation residents who's moved to the city of Farmington. Part of that is because of the opportunities that exist in that community, and as opposed to what you see on the reservation. If you ever get a chance, drive down there. It is quite literally a third world country. It is a very stark contrast to what we see in other urbanized and developed areas. And so you could understand those folks are looking for opportunities, ways to take care of their family, and more of them are moving into the cities that surround the nation. Where we're at right now is an interesting kind of moment, because we have new leadership in the Navajo Nation who in my mind finally recognizes that in the Four Corners area, we have to be engaged in this together. And that their interest is aligned with our interest in order to promote long-term sustainable jobs so that our people want to stay in that part of New Mexico or Arizona or Utah. And so we have new leadership who's there. Dr. Boo Nygren, look him up. He just kicked off Tony Hawk came and built a skate park on the Navajo Nation, and Dr. Boo was shredding, and it's really cool. So new leadership who understands the broader mindset that some of these things that we have carried in our backpack for a long time that has stopped us from sitting at the table together to share how can we work together kind of things, that backpack has to be kind of taken off, and we need to have some more important real conversations on how do we share in these resources. Shiprock, you can Google that one. Shiprock's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's an iconic trait, landscape trait for Farmington. I have a huge picture that my grandmother painted. It's in my office at City Hall. Right now, you have no access to get to Shiprock. You can get around it, but you can't get to it. You couldn't climb it. You might be able to fly over it. And so when we have people show up and they're like, hey, show us where we should go, they immediately look over like, can we go see that? Well, you can kind of see that. So we need to find ways for us to open up those conversations so that, hey, how can we overcome some of these hesitations and bring everybody together in a moment where we can share in that resource and that thing, because that's what brings people to areas like ours. Monument Valley is another great example of something like that.
I'll hand it over in just a minute if that's all right. Okay. I think we have a lot of data at our fingertips that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. The Trust for Public Lands is a wonderful partner in compiling demographic and economic data that helps cities and communities understand where they have a lack of access or where they have a lack of resource, so we can better target potentially areas that are don't have any green spaces or don't have any access to open space, which is a critical mental health amenity. The other thing I think I will just say about diversity is storytelling. I think having an invocation at the beginning of this conference, we didn't do that 5-6 years ago. And so we're learning as we're going that storytelling about the folks who were here before we all showed up is part of how we educate our younger folks and some of our older folks about the stories of the land. And so I think we can use some deliberate, with good leadership, planning to identify areas in places that don't have access to open space and then tell stories in those areas, potentially with a new tool. Maybe you use a kiosk where some kid who can't get his face off his cell phone can look at a QR code and learn about the history of the place. There's a lot of creativity. I think somebody said everything's on the table. There's a lot of creativity that's possible if we can access some good data.
You make a great point about Trust for Public Lands, and I think this truly is where the nonprofit ecosystem really is showing up. We actually have a lot to celebrate with respect to equitable access to the outdoors. Outdoor Afro, Latino outdoors, Natives outdoors, Brown Girls Climb. The list goes on and on. In the last 7 years, 19 nonprofits have been created to help bring equitable access to outdoor communities. And the blessing in the middle of all of this is their funding mechanisms are going really, really well. If you read Rue Mapp, who's the CEO of Outdoor Afro, she wrote a book called Nature Swagger, and it's the most incredible kaleidoscope of stories about the evolution of that space and how do we pull in different segments of our society to the outdoors. So in my mind's eye, this process is working. It's actually, people are showing up in different ways, both in the consumer space as well as in the engagement space. And believe it or not, when it comes to that equitable access, studies have shown across the United States, it's less about finding that green space or being 10 minutes away from that green space, but believe it or not, it's the last 5 miles of transportation to get these kids out of an urban corridor and up into something that's perceived as wilderness. So ironically enough, it's conversations with departments of transportation, it's bus routes, it's actually having a bus stop at a trailhead. You know, if you look at what Oregon's done in a couple of different ways, they've actually shown up and taken this to heart. Washington State, same thing. So when you ask yourself the question of truly what does equitable access look like, yes, on one side there's the NGO that provides that awareness, that opening of the door, and that opportunity. But again, getting back to that infrastructure question, how do these kids actually get to that wild space? How do they show up there? How do they come home? What does that safe path actually look like? Whether it's 10-minute walk or it's the last 5 miles on a bus.
Just to add a different twist to it, another thing is to, you know, when we're hiring our employees, we're really looking hard for that diversity piece at the same, to try and get, you know, we got a lot of different folks that want to camp. I was at a conference recently, and Black Folks Camp 2 has one of the most dynamic folks that speak that created that group. And one of the messages that they gave to the state parks directors at our annual conference was, "We are here. We want to be your partners. But if we're not your partner, you will feel it." Because their economic impact that they can bring. So again, we're trying to at least, through my space, try and see when we're hiring folks, how can we diversify? How can we make everybody look, this is Idaho, so it is not quite as diverse as many other states, but at the same time, it's something that as the former state director of HR, I will tell you that is something that we are all looking towards to make sure that there is no discrimination.
I do want to add that the Outdoor Recreation Office of New Mexico has created the Outdoor Equity Fund, and they are funding organizations that are looking to get individuals out on the trails.
These questions are great, y'all. Impressive with the content. And one was brought up, and this is a safe room to do this, so we're going to grab a third rail. What is the role of federal wilderness policy now in that space, given the increased demands we're now seeing in our backcountry? We got a base camp mayor, we've got a city rep who's where the customer comes from, we got a promoter, and then we've got another base camp supplemental. So I'm interested to hear y'all's take. Or you can just be like, that's a bad question, Scott, go away, please die.
We talked about Centennial Trail a few minutes ago. Part of that Centennial Trail goes through the Frank Church Wilderness area that I mentioned earlier. And in that Frank Church Wilderness area, we also still have, there's private in-holdings. And in those in-holdings, many of them allow access for the Centennial Trail through it. A few years ago, some of you might remember the Pistol Creek bridge blew out. And so we're trying to, we have a private property owner that has allowed us to to put some wayfinding through there so people can still access that Centennial Trail to keep going either north or south and get across Pistol Creek until we can get a bridge put in. So we're looking at ways to work with people to get access into the wilderness. There's been a lot of issues with regard to just even that trail and other trails. How do you manage it? How can we maintain them? It's so difficult to maintain them, to get back in there and make sure that keep those trails open with using non-motorized or non-mechanized means. So there's certainly some discussion about how can we get some other ways to be able to do that, or some maybe 2 weeks a year we can go in and kind of get those trails cleaned up so people can access them and use them, and maybe even reroute some of them so that they're more usable and more findable. Because there's not very many people. We just hired our non-motorized program manager. She's one of the few people who has hiked the entire Centennial Trail from Nevada to Canada, so she actually knows where it is. That's one of the things that we're trying to work with through the wilderness areas.
You say wilderness, and I think of designated wilderness, so that we don't abut any designated wilderness. We don't manage trails through designated wilderness, but we manage trails through private property, county property, city property, state property, BLM property, U.S. Forest Service property, all funded by the city. And partnerships. The Forest Service kicks in $40,000 a year, BLM kicks in $40,000 a year, but the city of Boise has the staff that are going out and maintaining those trails. The challenge is, I think from a user perspective, we've tried to create this seamless experience where you have one set of rules that applies to all the trails regardless of whose property you're on. And that has sort of just been thrown out the window with the advent of all sorts of different types of motorized use. Whether, I mean, I consider e-bikes motorized even though they aren't considered motorized.
Ooh.
I know, right?
Here
It's
we
really
go.
getting controversial in here, guys.
And they don't pay anything, right?
They don't pay anything.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
They're not. I mean, and the federal government, you know, has a different set of rules, whether you're Forest Service or the BLM, about how e-bikes would be treated or not treated. The city of Boise has an obligation through the Americans with Disability Act to provide accessible trails for other power-driven mobility devices, which e-bikes is one of. So we had to go through an exercise of designating trails that were e-bike appropriate, being really thoughtful about our partners and what their rules are. I think if we had an opportunity to maybe like thin the red tape so that we could be more flexible with use type and what's important on the ground, we might be able to help users understand what's appropriate where, because no one's enforcing anything. And that's been a big sort of challenge with regard to how we manage between different agencies, whether or not it's wilderness.
You know, we won't get into the e-bike thing. I've never been called a promoter before, Scott, so I'll take it. It's like fight night. That's good. So when anybody here, and Ashley, I know you know this, know what FICOR is? There you go. So loose definition, it's basically a rough agreement that all the associated programs and divisions are going to play nice together, and leadership rotates between each one of those divisions as the years go by, in theory. If you use the example for a state level government, that's like saying this month we're going to let HR run town. Next month, we're going to let the Department of Transportation run town. The next month, maybe the third or fourth month, we'll let the mayor take a swing at it. And then the month after that, city council is going to have their say. So it's this headless snake, to your point about red tape and to your point about understanding fee structures, you know, tongue in cheek about e-bikes, but anybody here seen a battery powered dirt bike yet? Or hear about the Polaris is making them. Cake is making side-by-sides. Yeah, KTM. The technologies that are coming to the table with respect to how companies and organizations engage in that space and pay to play and understand those things. Red tape that's written right now is not written for the emerging technologies in the emerging face of the industry. So the argument for a federal office, I joke a lot about it being an air traffic control system between some of these pieces to make sure that the agencies are talking, to make sure that it doesn't remain a headless snake, and to call for the redefinition of the red tape. Because right now, the red tape that we're facing was written a long time ago and has no capacity to even understand some of these emerging spaces, impacts, or technologies.
I'm really glad I'm here. I'm learning so much just listening to this conversation, because in an area that is so heavily, you know, public lands, the user interface is a big issue for us. We have a huge recreation management plan that guides the use for the Glade area, but it's everybody on top of everybody. Then there's no, the comment was made, there's no enforcement. And the mountain bike community is just begging for enforcement. They want county sheriffs out there. They want the city of Farmington to have a whole division that are helping keep OHVs off of their trails. I mean, it's a constant conversation, but there is no enforcement. I think the BLM office has 2 rangers. It's 1.5 million acres. They can't be everywhere all the time, and obviously they know where their hot spots are. But that's one of the big issues we face, and would love to see something come down the line that would help us facilitate, you know, I don't know, designating and creating spaces between buffer zones, whatever the case may be. Of course, people will be people, and will continue to do ridiculous things. The wilderness designation component for me it touches home because we have the Bisti Badlands. It's an area that if you didn't know how to get through it, it's a dangerous place to be. There is no designated trails through it, but we promote the heck out of it. Like, hey, come to Farmington. Let's send you out in the middle of nowhere. You're going to see some really cool stuff. And here's this paper map that the BLM will provide you, and maybe you can find an electronic version, but, well, good luck. Fortunately, Trailheads and some other apps have kind of come in, and they've kind of helped a little bit. People are out there marking where to go, but because it's wilderness designated, they won't let us put anything out there. And there's some really amazing components of this landscape, frankly, I think should be highlighted with information signs, or, you know, scan the QR code and bring up info about what you're looking at, because you could be standing on a mound of fish poop, which happened to me in this old swamp area. picking up this stuff, and I was walking with somebody from the BLM who was with me, and she's like, you know what that is? And I was like, I have no idea what it looks like. A rock. She goes, it looks like dog poop. I said, it does look like dog poop. She goes, that's fish poop. This was a swamp. This is where it all got. I was like, oh, see, that's cool stuff. I mean, people need to know that that's what they're standing on. So I would like to see some revamping and reconstruction of what those designations are that help contribute to that local economy so we can get people out there and get them out there safely.
Fish poop. Fish poop.
Does everybody know the word for that? I mean, it's like
Whoever had fish poop on their bingo card for 10 a.m. this morning, you're the winner. Fish poop. Okay, outdoor rec. This is the cancer question. Are we all just projecting infinite growth? I mean, what, dear Lord, stops this other than the silver tsunami that's going to hit us soon when we become an older country? What do y'all see as, where the blue hell are we going, and what's the logical end of this? Any thoughts on that? And you can say, we don't know. That's fine. But what are y'all thinking? I mean, Sarah, how many more miles of trails can the foothills take? Mr. Mayor, how many more EMS calls can y'all take to the backcountry? You know, where is the logical termini of this?
Gosh, I don't see one. The pandemic, we had threefold increases in use in our foothills and on our pathways and in our parks. You talk about the essential services, and cleaning bathrooms and emptying trash cans were essential services because everyone was outside. And that hasn't changed. It's just increased. And with different modalities available to people with different abilities, I don't see it stopping, which is why I could kind of go back to this, like, we got to be more deliberate about how we manage and set up these places to handle different types of users and more users, so that folks who want to have an experience where they're not seeing a bunch of people have a place to go. And folks who want to be around other people and feel outdoors is like a fellowship opportunity have a place to go.
You know, just to back it up nationally, the data's come out in 2021, 54% of the US population got outside. Over 50%. That's 164 million people found a way to go outside and spend time outside. So in the context of where I think you said in the blue hell this is going, it's going, and it's going, and it's going. So again, my argument is, you know, we're racing hard to figure out the impacts, the infrastructure, and how to maintain that ecosystem. I think the one other question you need to add to the conversation is, if it truly is this big and it is this important, how do we galvanize that political voice to understand, to make it the awareness of, if that many Americans are choosing to get outside regardless of your age, race, color, or creed, it is part of the national fabric and the national infrastructure and needs to be treated socially and fiscally as such.
A lot of questions for Director Buxton here. A pretty interesting one. How are you brokering, or what's the intersection between motorized trail users, non-motorized trail users, and negotiating peace settlements between those two, short of bringing the UN in to help you with that?
That's a consistent issue. I mean, then there's the are you motorized or aren't you motorized question, right? We just talked about that. And I think one of the things that's come up is, you know, we've been working with our Department of Commerce, as well as the Department of Lands, you know, Fish and Game, and then certainly our federal land manager as well. How do we work together to make sure that the trails are maintained, that the trails are signed, that when their designation is there, people know? We actually have our own app that is updated weekly on our website that tells you where every motorized and non-motorized trail are in the state of Idaho. There's approximately 19,500 miles of trail. In Idaho, approximately 7,000 of those are designated as motorized. So look at our website. You can download it when you want to go out and find a way. It'll tell you that it's open, closed. We'll tell you where all the fires are, and we also have that for groomed snowmobile trails across the state too, and tell you when they were groomed and where they are. But those are the types of things. Information is power. We also have in our budget, the legislature approved $100,000 for us to upgrade our Recreate Responsibly campaigns and work with with all of our stakeholders to address those things. You know, as we're saying, Boise and we do too work with private property owners who allow public access. We work closely with the Trails Association. We work with the Idaho Recreation Council, ATV and boating, and all those other groups to try and alleviate as many user conflicts as possible. But we also advocate outdoor recreation, period. Outdoor recreation is the mental health of our citizenry. And so I for one, love to hike. I also have a trail bike too. So I don't snowmobile as much because I'm usually the legislature, but those are the things that I think are important in our state. And how do we work together? How do we, it's interesting, we had a meeting with the Rocky Mountain State Parks directors a couple of weeks ago, and one of them mentioned that they were contacted by one of the outdoor magazines. And a couple other ones said, well, I was too. And I looked at my email, I'm like, oh, I guess I should call them back. But the question from them was, you know, we're talking a little about the National Park Service. The National Park Service, you know, the national parks, people see those as part of their bucket list. And so now that you're seeing more people saying, hey, we're finding state parks across the United States. State parks are super cool. There are things that they have, that very unique qualities for them to be state parks, whether it's in Idaho or Utah or Colorado or any state you want to talk about. But what some of the discussion was, well, we want to find more extreme recreation, so we want to go to state parks. And the parks directors are like, no way. We want responsible recreation. We want people to be able to recreate, whether it's motorized or non-motorized, in a manner that maintains our beautiful natural resources. And how do we work together to do that? And how do we get those messages across? So that $100,000, while it's just a little bit, it's more than we've ever seen. So in Idaho, that's what we're going to try and do, and we'll work together with whoever would like to get that message out. But I, for one, like to ride my motorcycle, but I am not one you're going to see tearing up the Boise foothills. I did grow up in Boise, by the way. So I think that those are the types of things we're seeing. We're also seeing a real increase in desire to have more law enforcement or more enforcement. How do we get compliance? You know, we have ranger compliance training, so our rangers are trained to help people comply with the law. We are not post-certified. We are not what we call sworn officers. We're one of the few states that does not have park rangers that are law enforcement. They do have the ability under the statutes to write some citations, but we work closely with the Sheriff's Department, with Fish and Game's law enforcement officers and their conservation officers, as well as our state police. And we are very remote, as you saw from the slides. So sometimes we're the only first responders that are there. And they're all trained to do those things, but we're working hard for training to get people to be able to, de-escalate situations and conflict too. So I think that type of law enforcement is what everyone's looking towards, and how do we work more together for that, to get more people, more of our trail rangers out there talking to people. And we have some more permanent positions for trail rangers statewide, both in Idaho Falls, Coeur d'Alene, as well as out of Boise. So we're working hard with all the other groups, but again, we're a little bit more remote. But I think that law enforcement or those are the things we need to. And again, it all goes back to funding. You hear every sheriff's department say we need more funding. Idaho State Police, we need more funding. Fish and Game, we need more funding for all those things and more people.
Real quick, show of hands in the audience. How many of y'all are in charge of building stuff, infrastructure? Show of hands. This question has come up a couple times. Dear Lord, it takes me too long, and the projects cost too much. And with increasing demand, how in the world are we even getting these things bid out and getting responsors and building things fast, quickly, ecologically sustainable? Are y'all seeing any innovations that are allowing us to move faster, quicker, more nimbly, and more efficiently in terms of building the infrastructure that outdoor recreation demands?
We spend a lot of time with our contractors and our design professionals, telling them when things are going to come out, how they're going to come out. We actually opened the bids for a new 50-unit campground the other day, and we had 11 bidders. So we work. We're doing that all over the state. We have our own in-house design team and construction management teams too that go all over the state, and they're like I said, so that does help, and it helps have those relationships. Fortunately, outdoor rec is really popular, and a lot of the contractors would like to build something that they can show their kids instead of a new road.
You know, I'll answer it two ways, from an innovation standpoint and then the funding mechanism. So from an innovation standpoint, in Colorado a few years ago, there were a couple of parks that were looking to revamp their campgrounds. And they put out bids, and they got bids back, and a very, very cookie cutter process, because again, you're relying on a process that's been around for a long time. But one of the perplexing things that the park directors kept coming back to the table with is, we can't figure out why people continue to use the group campsites and not the individual slots. The group campsites are overloaded, oversubscribed, they're overbooked, but the individual campsites, the numbers seem to be consistently down. And so then we dug into the demographics of the region, which the region was predominantly Latino and Hispanic. And being from a Latino family myself, when we go car camping, it's not just me. We bring grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole kitchen, and at least 3 or 4 family-size tents. Everybody's coming. So what they realized was these families are gravitating towards the group campsites. They're not getting individual slots. So when you reimagine the construction for some of these things, and not just putting the same old bid out to the world to come back, you have to think about it through the lens of, how are you addressing the population in which that amenity serves? Can you think about it in a different way? And does that lead to different both support infrastructure and funding mechanisms? Because in this instance, a bunch of different NGOs showed up to do things differently, to have a different kind of park with a central gathering space for the community. So I would argue that if you go back to the beginning and you look at things in a different way, that is possible. Does anybody remember the legislation that came forward federally called Recreation Not Red Tape? I still twinge to say that out loud. There was a hopeful glimmer of light out there at the federal level. There was this realization for a hot minute that, yeah, we got a problem, and yes, there's a way to address it. And that, because it turned into a legislative Christmas tree, kind of fell apart bit by bit. But there is a possibility to run things like this again, to try to get out of our own way. So there are some examples of both local engagement and trying to understand how we can look at things differently in a federal way.
I go back to partnerships. Boise has a long history of philanthropy supporting parks. And just recently we opened a park in an area that didn't have access to open space. And that was a partnership between a developer who was interested in addressing the amenity trap with some affordable housing, and understanding that a park next to their development was an amenity. We were able to work through an agreement where we shared some cost of the build out of the park. The city did some things, the developer did some things. We have agreements in place that, you know, make it very clear on who's got what and who's responsible for what. But if you can find within your community some of those folks who have an ethic related to the challenges that are addressing your community, there are great examples. That's just one within this city where we've been able to partner to try and address some of those cost increases. But at the end of the day, we have a staffing capacity issue as well. And I think, you know, parks, we need to start fostering the next generation of park designers, of construction managers, of people who are knowledgeable and can go out there and get the work done.
Well, this has been a great group. We're at the end. I'm going to give each a couple minutes to wrap up and finish up here. But thank you all for dropping so much knowledge on us. And I did almost quiver when you said shovel-ready projects, a term I never want to hear again as long as I live. So we'll start with the mayor here and work our way down the table.
We're good. Again, I just appreciate and am very humbled about the opportunity to come here and be with this amazing group of panelists and get to listen and learn and understand kind of the broad spectrum of what's happening in outdoor recreation, how different communities are dealing with it, opportunities to improve the federal policies and all those kind of things. And I know that our community is going to be going through some of those. I'm hopeful our community is going to be going through some of those growth pains, because we're frankly betting on outdoor recreation in our community and in the state of New Mexico as a whole, and believe that we are primed for investment and to invite you and your families down and help us grow. We need private investment in the outdoor space. That is the big issue that we're facing. They were talking about the increased cost. Part of the issue we have, you know, we go out to do a trail project through the BLM, and we end up with a road construction company who comes out to build trails. Well, for those passionate mountain bikers who are in our area, They don't want to see a giant road construction company come out and build the trails. They want to see a professional trail development company come out and build the trails. And so you've got this constant pushback on things we're trying to do, the cost of doing it, and what the actual users want to see happen. And we're trying to work all that out. And it's all about all of us being at the table together and having these open conversations. And we need to continue to facilitate those things. So again, thank you for being here. Check out farmingtonnn.org. And we'll look forward to the rest of the conference. Thank you.
I'll just say one thing because I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to say, but I will plug the Ridge to Rivers website. If you are here for a little bit of time and you have an opportunity and the snow stops and it's not muddy, maybe another month or so until spring gets here, pray for spring. The Ridge to Rivers website is a great tool. I think it's a great example of how a collaborative can come together, a collaboration can come together, multi-jurisdictional collaborative can come together and create an interactive map that talks about trail conditions, helps you identify where you are so you don't get lost, and helps with the regulation issue that we were talking about earlier between different jurisdictions. So please take a look at our interactive map. We're very proud of it. And thank you for having me.
I'm going to end with a short story since we sort of dabbled on the e-bike thing really quickly. I was out for a ride on a quote-unquote regular mountain bike on a trail designated to quote-unquote be for regular mountain bikes, and I came across two riders. One, it was very evident, was an e-bike. The other one looked like a normal mountain bike. And I said very politely, I'm sorry, sir, this trail is designated for just regular mountain bikes. You're riding an e-bike, so just be aware of where you are, be aware of the trail system, be aware of the rules and regulations. This man, without breaking eye contact with me, not in a confrontational way at all, calmly reached down, unclicked the battery from his bike, slid it into his camelback, and said, "Presto changeo. Now I'm on a regular bike." And not wanting to be confrontational, I'm like, "Thank you, sir. Have a very nice day. Enjoy your ride." Started to ride away. He's like, "Hang on there, young fella. Wait a minute." Notice I said young fella. "You didn't ask my wife about her bike." And I looked down. I'm like, "Well, it seems to be just a regular old bike." He said, Take a closer look. And I looked down at the bottom of the frame, and there, blinking right in my face, was a little LED light. The bike that she was on had the battery system integrated into the bottom tube of the bike. You could not tell it was an e-bike. And he kind of looked at me and was like, "Hey, gotcha." The reason why I share this story is not to point out the chasm between electric and non-electric, not to point out the disparities between pay-to-play and fee services and how are we going to take care of all this. The reason why I share this story in closing is to point out we need to challenge the way we think about how innovation is impacting the things that we do. We are currently in the middle of writing the new playbook for the outdoor recreation industry. So challenge yourself in your community, get back on the phone with your elected officials, figure out how to leverage the power and capacity of this multi-billion-dollar economy for the greater good. And thank you for having me.
I just appreciate everyone's time and attention, and again, many thanks to the Andrus Center for providing this opportunity for all of us to get together and look for more opportunities to fix some of the things that may have been broken, but there's a lot of things that aren't.
Thank you all so much for this Thank you for this wonderful panel. The audience members have earned a break. If you'd like to go outside and catch some snowflakes on your tongue, you can do that. Or